Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody.
Hey, good evening.
Hi.
Hey,
Evening.
panel. You guys all right?
Yeah, we're doing
Yeah,
well.
good, thank you.
Doing good.
Fabulous, fabulous. If I can just ask everybody to mute their mics just for the time being, and then we can unmute them when we begin the conversation. To everybody watching, thank you for joining. Thank you for making time. I hope you've enjoyed the main service. I haven't had a chance to watch the main service yet. I'm going to have to watch it after this, as I did the other day, but I trust it was fantastic. We're going to give you a couple of minutes just to share the link, tell your friend, tell your mom, tell your nan, tell everybody you need to tell, send them the link. We're also obviously on YouTube. So those of us joining us on YouTube, welcome. Those of you joining on Facebook, welcome. And I believe we're also on the SEC general platforms as well. So to all of you guys coming in from the adult service, welcome to you guys as well. So again, we'll just give a couple of minutes just for everyone to send out the links and just to tell everyone that we're live, and then we'll get going. Panel, everyone feeling good? Thumbs up. All right, good. I think this is going to be a good one. So again, just a couple more minutes, and then we'll start moving. Hope everyone's having a fun lockdown. I don't know where in the world you're all joining from, but we're starting to ease up over here. So it's we can get Starbucks. This is always a good sign. So, hello, Auntie Blake. How are you? I don't know if you guys can see the comments from Facebook, but Mommy Blake is an important lady. All right, cool. All right, well, I think that's been enough time for the links to go out. We'll get started so we can jump into the meat of this. Guys, welcome and thank you so much for making the time to share your expertise with us and to just join in what is really a very important conversation, especially given the climate that society is in and subsequently the church is in. So thank you, and thank you for your willingness to share your experiences with us. For those of you who are joining us live, thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for joining us in the previous conversations. We are going to be on tonight, obviously, and then we're going to be next on Friday, and then we're going to be next on Sunday. Friday, we're going to be asking the question, is Christianity a European religion? How do we express our faith? And then on Sunday night, we will be delving into the topic of culture, the church, and our beliefs. How does culture permeate into our beliefs and therefore affect how we do church? And so those are going to be the two conversations. Sunday night, but back by popular demand, is going to be Dr. Olive Hemmings. She has been a powerhouse for us in previous conversations, and she's going to be back leading the conversation again. On Friday night, we're going to be joined by Dr. William Acker from Birkbeck University. So he's a fantastic thinker around culture and Christianity. And we're also going to be joined by Dr. Gifford Ramey from Newbold College, another powerhouse, great thinker, fantastic people, and as well as some other young people as well. Dr. Janine Eugene, I was about to say Chandler, but she's since been married. So Dr. Janine Eugene is going to be joining us as well. And we're going to be having those conversations. But tonight, this is the panel, and I'm going to ask you guys to just introduce yourselves. Matthew, if we can start with you, please tell us who you are and where you're from and what you do.
Sure. My name is Matthew Herrell. I'm a pastor in the South England Conference. Currently pastoring a church called Acts Church, a church plant called Acts Church in East London. And more or less everything that I do revolves around trying to do Acts Church in East London currently. Yeah.
Good stuff. And have you grown up in church?
Yes, grown up in church, pretty much from not long after birth. So I've been in for a long time. A life sentence.
We like the life.
Been in a long time, and still happy to be here.
Good. Thank you, Matthew. Andrew, if you can let us know who you are, what you do.
Yes, my name is Andrew Fuller. I am a business owner, passionate about Christ, love young people. And yeah, been in church all my life, in and out of the conveyor belt door and all of that stuff. But finally came back at the age of 16. And since then, I have built my ministry, you know, in view of the community, those outside. That's what I would say that I build everything I do on. If you're outside, then I care about you a really lot.
Fantastic. I like that. We're going to get into how you got your beard to be like that, because I know it's not just prayer and fasting. That hasn't worked for me. So we'll talk about that a little later on. But Andreas, if you can just tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah, my name is Andreas Bekai, and it's intimidating to follow Andrew Fuller in a list of people to introduce myself, but I will try. So I am currently in Walla Walla, Washington, which means nothing to many people, but it's in America, and the closest city that would give you any sense of geography would be Seattle. And to help you even further, you have California on the West Coast. Above that is Oregon. Above that is Washington. And that's where Seattle is. So I grew up in England for the most part. Me and Thomas grew up from about the age of 7 in Reading. And I moved to Andrews University for my MDiv and have stayed here since. And I am currently the lead pastor here at the Walla Walla University Church. And it's good to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for making the time. Sophie, please let us know who you are, what you do.
Hey, my name is Sophie Hannah. I work for an international development charity as a volunteering programs officer, which means I'm in charge of creating and organizing their volunteering opportunities, the projects that they do. I grew up in church as well, and left when I was a teen, came back in my late teens, and have been here ever since. So yeah.
Fantastic. It's good to have you back, Sophie. I'm glad you came back.
I mean, I'd like to think that 17 wasn't a long time ago, but it is.
It's fine. It's fine. I was trying to come into the angle as 17 just the other day, but shut that down. Reality reigns in this conversation. Abigail, please let us know who you are and what you do.
I don't even know. Who am I? I am a young person who's really active and passionate about my church. I recognize that in order to really express passion, you have to suffer in areas. And I think I do suffer in some respects. Sunday was testament of that, back-to-back meetings, no real social life on Sunday. But I feel that there's a change about to come, and I want to be part of the generation that make that change reality.
Wow.
So that's about me. I work for the London Assembly, who scrutinized Sadiq Khan. So yeah, that's
fun times. About me. Good. Okay, good. Well, thank you guys for again making the time. My name is Thomas. I do some work with Anthony during the times when he's not furloughed in the SEC youth department. And youth ministry. Sorry, I had to do a little dig on the furlough there. And also outside of this, I'm in a completely different vein. I work in fashion as a menswear stylist, so I get paid to make guys look decent. And so I've been doing that for a number of years now. But I have a passion for young people, and I always have. Like Sophie a little bit, I had a little what we might call a crisis of faith. That's the kind of sanitized way that we normally praise those things. And I was kind of on the peripheries and then came back. And I've been blessed to have this opportunity to kind of contribute to the journeys of young people within church. And it's taken us here. During lockdown, I've been doing this digital content stuff, and it's been fun. But as we get into tonight's topic, which is community and justice, I want to begin by asking you guys a question. What's happening in church right now with regards to a heightened awareness of social justice issues? Is this a movement or is this a moment? Is this a movement or is this a moment? Andreas, if you can begin with you.
I was hoping you wouldn't begin with me, but here we go. It's difficult for me to speak presently because I'm in a completely different country. So I'll try and keep in view both what's happening in America and what I know is happening in the in the UK. I think we're in a cultural moment where there has been an awakening in the minds of many people about some of the systemic issues which have been plaguing the church and also society for a long time. And I find that the UK, even though it's a completely different social context to America, not having the original sin of slavery, really propping up the rise of a nation, that there are many things that Black people and people of color in England are also realizing about this moment. And I do think that the church is having to have a moral reckoning with how we have dealt with issues of justice and especially issues of racism when it comes to our church. And I think often we miss what Paul says in Corinthians about the proclamation that God was in Christ reconciling himself to the world. And this idea of reconciling himself to the world, for me, is this idea of a vision of transforming society or the kingdom of God. And we've made the two issues separate. We've made one essential and one optional. So it's essential to have the gospel, but it's optional to engage in the work of justice. And leaders are waking up to the fact that our young people are not Gnostic. They do not separate the spirit and the body. They don't separate their religious experience from their lived experience during the week. And that, in fact, both of them are tools of righteousness to help us to become more like Christ. So I would hope that this isn't just a moment which can be swept aside as passing, but we can really understand this is something that we're called to. And in fact, I think as Adventists, if I reflect on this call in Revelation 14, that there's a loud cry, there's a message of the gospel going to the world. There is this idea attendant in that it goes to every tribe, kindred, tongue, and nation. And so it's a cosmopolitan message. But if we haven't dealt with the fact that inbred in some of our practices, either by omission or commission, we don't deal with the harms that people are suffering, then we can't really take a gospel to an entire world who in many ways are oppressed and are suffering different injustices. So I'll just leave it there as a opening comment.
Got it. Sophie, is this a moment or is this a movement?
I guess for me, the question that I had a counter question when you first asked it was, do we feel like we have been seeing a movement in our churches across the country in terms of, I know that we've released statements as a church, but do you feel like it actually has been a movement? Because I feel like it's yet to be that in our churches yet. I think we're recognizing what's going on in society. I think you can't be in a place now in society where you can be seen to be turning a blind eye to the Black Lives Movement and exactly what's going on now. But I don't know if I would say in our churches I'm seeing a movement just yet. A movement is going to take more than a statement for me. It's going to take active steps to, like, as Andreas was saying, there are systems that have been in place, consciously or unconsciously, that have not allowed us to do the message that we have been given as Christians, the message that God has given us to be justice lovers and to be making sure that justice is dealt out wherever we are as Christian beings, wherever our body as the church is, that we're making sure that as far as it's possible that justice is being given. But I don't know if I see a movement on that yet. I really hope it's a turning point, but I don't know. I ask you guys, do you feel like it's a movement? I see individual churches and individual pastors, but not collectively, and that's what I'm hungry to see in the church.
That makes a lot of sense. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
I think that ultimately any movement always begins with a moment, but for any moment to transition and become a movement, the defining factor I think that you always need is leadership. A moment cannot become a movement with lots of people with good intentions, meaning well, all either doing their own thing or all moving in different directions. You really need leaders at the helm to kind of channel the energy, channel the ideas, and really just provide a template for people to follow. And I think that's the same both inside the church and outside of the church. You always need leaders who can kind of step up and be counted. So, and in no way am I undermining our leaders in church. You know, I'm not, again, I believe in church organization. I'm behind the church leadership in our country and in our union. But that is going to be the thing that really enables a moment to become a movement. Do we want to really pick up the slack and do something about it? Ultimately, justice is a really hard thing to fight for. It doesn't come it doesn't come easily. You know, to bring about justice realistically, we would have to, I don't know, we would have to ask ourselves questions if we really want to take part in moving the needle. We'd have to ask ourselves really hard questions like, do we want to park a lot of the things that we do and make this the main thing that we do?
And
I'm not here to say what that answer should be for our organization in this country, but or even the worldwide church, to be honest with you. But if the answer is no, then we don't really have a voice at the table, to be honest with you. There's no half measures when it comes to fighting for justice. It's a fight. You can't halfway fight. You'll get beaten up, you know. You have to kind of go all in or don't bother. So it really needs leadership from the very top of the church, to be honest with you. But failing that, then I think what Sophie says is right. And again, not pointing any fingers within our worldwide church organization, but sometimes if you can't wait around for things, that the worldwide church is like a cruise ship. It takes a long time to turn around, to change direction, to do anything. So sometimes you got to have your little dinghies that can be a bit more agile, you know, little captains of little ships trying to change the tide a little bit. So whether it's at local level or national, international level, leaders who are going to say, this is going to be the main thing that I stand for right now, that's what will move the needle as far as I'm concerned.
Andrew, if we can get a take from you, although I kind of suspect what your answer is going to be, but if you can tell us what your thoughts are with regards to whether this is a moment or a movement, and if it is just a moment right now, as has been intimated by the other panelists, how can we transition it into a movement?
So I would say definitely a moment, but hopeful movement. So both, most definitely. I could easily say, but we ain't done no moving in the past. But like Matthew said, everyone who made a move, that was the first time they moved. And then they became movers. They were known for moving. But when they first started moving, it was like people probably said, what time do you call this? You know, is it only now you're starting to move? So I'm careful enough to understand that I could stay here and blame. But if we're being chased down and we're not moving, and then the time where we're going to get caught, we start moving, I ain't complaining. I'm not complaining because we are in such a pandemic, right? On many levels, even though this is a racial thing right now, when you deal with people in the community, this is just what's there right now. That's the issue now. But there's many things. There's many things that are going on in our community right now amongst the racial tension. You know what I mean? So, but this is what I would say 100%. When it comes down to leadership and those on the ground, there has to be a way that we focus on both in a, you know, with balance. So I play for a football team, but I don't just train before the match for the official football team. For me to be a great footballer, I've got to have my own little training sessions, my own little, you know, drills on a Monday, on a Tuesday. And that's nothing to do with the football leadership. That's because of my passion for football. And I think that a lot of us are looking at the leadership like, blood, like what going for you guys though? But I slam that down. Like, let them be wrong, but you're wrong as well, because the Lord didn't call you to look at leadership, period. There's no text for that. There's no text for that. So I'm trying to say, we look to leadership, we help leadership, but at the same time, there's someone that is never going to see the GC or never going to understand the TED, but they'll understand you. And if you're waiting for them to move and then you move, that's a total misunderstanding of the gospel commission.
That's a powerful point. We have a point here from Facebook. John is saying this has to be the moment. If we as a church and as individuals do not change at this time, then we are doomed. Abigail.
I think that's really interesting to pick up on. And you mentioned something on Monday night. You pulled my phrase, "Justice is love in action."
Yeah.
And I really wonder, how do we see the systems at play that Andreas mentioned, reflecting that justice and reflecting that love in action? Because if God is love and justice is part of who he is, how do we really see that demonstrated? So I'd like to throw that to Andreas to begin with, and then kind of move around and see what other people think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm thinking about being a Seventh-day Adventist again. And I think what I struggled with growing up in the church was the fact that justice was such a foreign topic to even begin with. But a topic which wasn't growing up within the church was righteousness. And interestingly, if you go to the New Testament and you go and look at the word for justice and for righteousness, and I think there's a theologian here who went to Newbold who can give us more clarity on this. It's exactly the same right there. It's exactly the same word. They're synonymous, and it's not a sense of one is secondary and one is primary. They are literally the same word. This idea of righteousness and also this idea of justice. And I keep going back to this because I think it's important for us to realize that as Adventists and as people who follow Jesus, right, as disciples of Jesus, this is absolutely our mandate. This is not something which is new to the Bible or new to this moment. But speaking a little about love in action and what that might look like, let me give a stab at it. Would be to talk about the local and not the global. I'm with all of you that whatever happens in Silver Spring, Maryland, makes no difference, makes no material difference to our lives and to the decisions we make. No one really cares. Let's just be honest. No one really cares. But I think what is important is to have an idea of having a faithful presence locally where you've been called. And so if we look at justice as a global issue to tackle, then it's difficult to understand where are we going to start in putting love into action. But if you look at your neighborhood, if you look at the town center that you walk through, if you look at the school which is up the road from your church, then all of a sudden, I think there are many opportunities to show love in action. And this idea of localism, I think, should be really core to being a Christian, because we should be active citizens in the neighborhoods and in the networks in which we live.
Right.
My very small experiences with having seen that show that if you can have a faithful presence in your neighborhood, if you can literally know the people who are part of the civic life that you are part of, you will have opportunities, probably more than you can even attend to be involved in the work of justice. Because if you sit on a local city council, all of a sudden you start to recognize the places where there are gaps and where the local government is unable to fill those gaps, but you are able to step in either with a church or with a youth group, or with some other organization that you're part of. So I think love in action practically has to start in a very localized way, and a faithful presence. And it's difficult for us to do that because Adventists do not have a theology of place. We drive into our churches and then we go home.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's difficult for us to have a theology of place that I'm going to be in this church, I'm going to adopt this neighborhood, and I'm going to know their tears and their joys, and I'm going to be there when they have festivals, when they have concerts.
Right.
I'm going to be there when another kid is stabbed for the vigil, and they're going to know that our church has taken this community on. And so if we can't do that, it's so much easier to abstract justice, because you drive in, then you go home and you have nothing to do with your neighborhood. And then when something happens in your neighborhood, there's no collective group of people who are saying, let's do something, because we all live in different neighborhoods. So I think a theology of place and being very local will give us eyes to see the places in which we can be involved in the work of justice.
That's really interesting, because I'm currently reading a book called Church Forsaken. And on the back of the book, it says there aren't God-forsaken places, there are just church-forsaken places. church forsaken places. And I think that element of localism is so real, because I know there are times where I just want to take the train 30 miles away and go to a church down there rather than the church on my doorstep. And I think that's so common within our Adventist community. Matthew, it'd be really interesting to hear how you feel what you're doing with your church plant acts really takes on that localism.
Yeah, I'd love to share. Before I do, if it's okay though, can I just pick up on something that
go for it.
That Andrea said? You said something, bro, that I totally agree with, and I think everyone we were all resigned to the fact that yes, that's the reality. When you mentioned about like the leadership within the church, and it doesn't really have to have that much to do with what we do in our day-to-day lives and church on the ground and stuff. And I think we all kind of understood the reality and would all agree with you there. But what kind of popped into my head, and as I'm seeing the comments come, a lot of the people tuning in are talking about, don't worry about leadership, don't wait for leadership, let's be lay-led, grassroots, these kind of phrases, which I totally agree with. But it just made me think, should we not demand more of our leadership? Like, you need leaders. When you think about any organization, any group that brings about change, there's always a strong leader at the front. And I'm not even talking about a paid leader. I'm not talking specifically about pastors or administrators in our church. But when you think about any organization, there's always very strong leadership. And that's the reason why if someone is trying to take out an organization, you cut the head off the snake, and ultimately if you kill the leader, at some stage the whole movement kind of dies. Do you know what I mean? If we're speaking specifically about kind of Black movements and civil rights, we saw this all the time in the States. You know, they took out the head of the movement, be it MLK, be it Malcolm X, whoever it was, because then you just totally shut down the whole movement. And so this is just making me think, if we can agree that how the leadership looks is important, should we not be able to demand more from the leadership of our church? Should we be comfortable just being resigned to the fact that, and this isn't pushing back on Andrea, sorry, but I'm picking up and running with what you said, but it just made me feel like, it makes me feel very uneasy to think that, well, yeah, that's just how it is. These guys aren't really doing anything. We can't really be waiting on them. We should be able to hold them to account. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let me jump in a second.
Like that. So please, yeah.
Maybe it's both and. I don't think it's a zero-sum issue. I think it's probably both and. In that we should hold leaders to account, and all of us here are leaders. I think that's why we're here, because people listen to what we say in some regard. So we may find people pushing us, but it shouldn't. But if we find resistance, that doesn't mean we need to stop doing what we can do. So I think it's both and, not either or.
Right. Okay.
Andrew, I'm going to come to you in just a second. Andrew, sit tight. I'm going to come to you to begin to articulate a particular angle. But Sophie, I just wanted to ask, if you put on your member hat, and you think of yourself as a member of our church within this conference, somebody, I think Matthew earlier in his first remark said that in order for us to really pursue justice as an organization, as a people, then it requires a fundamental recalibration of the whole system to point us in the pursuit of justice, because it's not something you can do part-time or as a side gig. As a member of our church, would you feel that you were still getting the most out of church in terms of your spiritual growth if the whole apparatus of church was now to move from our insular, let's feed ourselves, programs for ourselves orientation that we currently have, to a very outward facing orientation, which, for example, let's say there was a mandate that said only one Sabbath a month will be spent in what we see as traditional worship that we have today, but the other 3 Sabbaths have to be spent in the community doing something to relieve the pain of the community. How would that make you feel as a member, as a young member as well?
I think from a position of where I am now in terms of my Christianity, I would be like, yeah, I welcome that.
Yeah.
But living that out is a very different thing. And I think that that's an important thing to realize as we're talking about, we need to go for justice. It's the local level. It's going to come with sacrifice, and it's going to come with us being made uncomfortable. Because at the moment, no one really likes to be uncomfortable. No one likes to be in a situation that doesn't feel familiar, that shakes up what we're used to. We like comfort as human beings, and justice and seeking justice, as Matthew said earlier, it's a fight. It's going to take us looking past our own issues and our own desires, and that's what we have to be willing to do as a movement, is to sacrifice. And I go to a church where they are active, probably one of the more active churches that I've ever been to be honest. And I wouldn't even say that we're out there 24/7. And the things that we do, like we do a breakfast feeding morning for like the homeless, because we previously worshipped before the lockdown at a homeless shelter, or a feeding shelter, and we get up early in the morning on Saturdays to go and feed the homeless. I do it once a month, and sometimes I don't want to get up and do it, like, because I'm tired. I just want to stay in bed. And I think it's important to realize what we're asking people to do is not going to be an easy thing. It's going to take a dramatic shift in the way that we understand what is required of us. Do I think it's necessary? I think 100%. But when it comes to it, I think people need to serve where they are called to. We need to be doing initiatives that people actually want to be a part of. Like I know what my interests are. I need to be thinking about, how do I serve the community with my interests or in the skills that I have been given? Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about justice initiatives, we do the same thing. We do a homeless shelter, a feeding shelter, or a this or a that. And I'm just like, our gifts are so diverse. Like one of the things, like, I know Andrew, you still play football, I'm sure, but when it was like the big five and we had all these massive events with church when we were younger in the SEC, or when I was younger, and that is something, like, he has a skill, he has an interest. How do I then use this to reach out to the community? Like, how do I do that? Because I think some of the things that we're doing aren't even enjoyable. And for us personally, and it's going to be a sacrifice and work, but it needs to be something that we enjoy doing on some level. These leaders that lead Black Lives Movement, they feel called. They feel purpose to do that. They're not doing it and they're like, to be honest, I'd rather be working somewhere else. So for me, I think we need to be looking at doing things that are just as diverse as our people, just as diverse as our community, because there's a lot of needs, and we like to focus on homelessness and education, but starting different types of things will give our people in our church a place to serve, where they are called.
That's a very interesting and powerful point. I wanna address one more thing, and then we're gonna go to you, Andrew. There's a question that's come in here from Ranette, which I think is such a powerful question, and also something that Shelly said I'll put on in a second. Is the SDA Church invested in fundamental reform of the system, or are we waiting for the second coming to do that? Sophie's rocking in her chair. Are we here to provide palliative care only? So have we already decided the world is dying and we just want them to die comfortably, or are we prepared to actually really turn this around? Sophie, I don't want you to collapse, so please answer.
Do you know what? I just feel a lot of times, a lot of the issues that are going on in the world, our thing is, Jesus is coming again. The world is broken and Jesus is coming to make it anew. And sometimes we absolve ourselves from the things that we can do here on this earth. Because something that someone said earlier, we should be looking, I think it was Andres, we need to be looking at the local. We need to be looking at the local. And I'm just trying to think back through the Bible where God has ever asked anybody to do anything that wasn't local. Like we talk about the patriarchs, but my man Jacob was working for his uncle Laban for a long time. Then he moved somewhere else and he was local. He moved somewhere else, he was local. He moved someone else. Like, he wasn't thinking about, I need to go and convert the unknown lands. Do you know what I mean? And even in the book of Deuteronomy, me and my husband have been reading this book and it's been life-changing for me. The book of Deuteronomy is talking about how you live in a community. How do you live now? You're in the promised land. How do you live? How do you live with your people here? How do you live with the people who are foreign? How do you live there? We need to be thinking about the Bible is a book about how do we live our lives where we are right now, and not thinking about the world is coming to an end. The world's been coming to an end. The world has been coming to an end. And I think it's lazy of us as Christians to kind of feel like this doesn't apply to us because we know Jesus is coming again. But there is so much we could do before he comes. So much we can do to lighten the load of other people, which is our calling and our duty. And when we think about Matthew, when it talks about, like how was it? You know, when I was hungry, when I was homeless, God is talking about when were you meeting the needs that were around you? Because were you meeting those needs? Because that's how I know that you're really down for me. So I feel like we have always been a local people, and I think now because we're so global and we're proud of our sense that we are global, and that's fine. You know, there's how many millions of Adventists, that's great. But it maybe takes away from the fact that we're always looking for something to move on a global scale rather than actually right here. I moved from the SEC to the NEC when I got married. My husband's a pastor in the NEC, and this is probably the first time in my life that I had ever lived in the area where I church, and it's been life-changing. To be able to be around our church community, to be able to drop in on them, to be able to do things really close, to be able to go back and forth. And he has always been the sort of person, he says, I don't want to live far from my church because I'm going to be a bad pastor. And I was just kind of like, what? I'm from London, ain't no one close to their church, it's whatever. But now seeing it up close, I'm just like, it makes a difference when you know your church community. When someone's like, can you drop me here? Do you know this part of Leicester? Yeah, I know it because this is my home now. So I think it's going to have to take a recalibration and know that it's going to come with sacrifice. Because I'm sure Andrew's going to tell us it hasn't been an easy path to be working in the communities. There's going to be ups and downs, but you need to be prepared for it mentally.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sophie's going to be our commitment speaker for CAT meeting next year, so look out for the full series of this sermon. Andrew, my man, you have been in the community, and you are a person that is synonymous with being in the community in South England Conference Adventist circles. Can you articulate to us on some level what the problems look like in the community that you're so you know, you said if you're outside, that's what you care about. If you can just give us an understanding of what the shape of the problems are outside that you encounter on a regular basis.
Yeah. So first things first, right? It's our foundation, the premise where we start. So we see it as we're the church, hallelujah, worship, divine service, AYS. Like, even if that is like the best service and it's theologically correct, best music, like the best everything, you've already positioned yourself away from the community already. So I'm not seeing it as the church should go to the community. Like that's where I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, so the church's job is not to go to the community. It sounds a bit far-fetched, but I believe living in London City, I am the community. Like, so I'm not trying to go and reach my dons. How like, bro, how am I trying to reach my friends? They're my friends already. Like, it's so then that means it's easy for me to win them because bro, like, I already know them. I already know their struggles. Like, they eat Heinz beans, I eat Heinz beans. They complain about the price of bread, I complain about the price of bread. So already I know their issues, bro. Gun crime is in my community, Tom, not just the world, bro. So it's not, you know, the community, bro. I'm struggling. It's not the community struggling. I'm struggling. This is where I don't even get into the Bible studies, the sermons, the revivals, the crusades, because it's, even if it's just because it's theologically correct, it doesn't mean it's relevant. It doesn't mean it's needed, bro. So I can give a great Bible study on how to evangelize. That whole premise might be biblical, but it's not really relevant because the church is the community. So let's not give seminars on how to evangelize, because that lets us know, Tom, that gives us the separation mentality already. It lets us know that we're nothing like them. They're not like us. We're the saved. They're the lost. We are really righteous and they're really not. So let's find means and methods on how to save them. But I see it like this. When someone dies in the community, Tom, how about I send out a WhatsApp before even man on the road found out? So it's not the road are keeping me enlightened. I see myself as still a part of that family. And just quickly, practical now, Tom, right? Bar none. Every time I'm speaking in local areas in London, I get messages from people in the world, like locally, full up. Bro, send me the address, let me come through. Or is there a live stream for that audio? Or or I saw that you were preaching for so-and-so, bro, that was sick. So my point is, I'm God's agent. We're meant to be God's agents, like in the world, just doing our thing, like living normal lives. But when we're making God moves, because we're connected with the people, we've made God palatable for them already. We've kind of proven that, raw Christians ain't like that. They're not stuck up because they know you. They know you're not stuck up. You know, church isn't that bad. Why? Because Fuller goes to church and he's still out here. You know, so that's what I would say, Tom, in the beginning, just before we go anywhere in regards to the community. We first have to understand we're not trying to reach them because that lets us know that we're nothing like them. We have to understand that we're just like them. We struggle like they struggle. If we start seeing them as people just like we are, then we don't have to reach them. We're right there with them.
I think that so the intersect, or the way we fail to intersect with our communities, shows that we're in a community but not with a community. And I think oftentimes we get into this easy narrative of being just going, pulling up, parking in their spots on a Sabbath, and then disappearing for the whole week. And they get, I think a lot of our churches in a lot of our areas would be happy at present because they've had their parking space on a Saturday. They haven't had noise on a Friday when we've got praise and worship practice. But what impact is that really having on our connections with those areas? What does it really say about us? And I really want to find out from Matthew, like going back a bit, how has our current state affected the interactions you've had with the people in your community as Acts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that Andrew is absolutely spot on, and I'd build on that a little bit more. I was just thinking as you were talking how we understand that Jesus was both fully God and fully man at the same time, and I feel like he's given us like the essence of that gift in a way, in that I am both fully the church and fully the community at the same time.
Right.
Both of those things. And I've sat in services, I'm sure you have, and we've spoken about in my own churches. I hold my hand up, I've said this kind of thing, like, how do we get the community into the church? I don't ever say that anymore, because I think of the community as the people that we don't know, the community of the people you do know. Do you know what I mean? It's everyone's got someone in their family that doesn't go to church. Everyone went to school with people or works with people that don't go to church. That's the community. So it's very hard to get a stranger to do something with you or for you. That's nigh on impossible. Do you know what I mean? So let's just stop trying to make strangers do things they don't want to do. Let's do some good stuff with the people that we do know that do know us. So what in answer to your question, or building on that, Abby, like we in our church, we have a very real commitment to service, and it's very embryonic, it's very early days, but we kind of made the decision from inception, one Sabbath a month. To start with, one Sabbath a month, we weren't going to have a worship service. We're going to go out and volunteer and do different things in different ways. And aside from that actually being a platform to try and help people other than ourselves, that also is our evangelistic strategy. So, you know what I mean? So because it's very easy, or a lot easier, to invite the community, i.e. my friends, to come and do something with me to help somebody else. So and as soon as they come with me and we go to the senior citizens home, or we go on whatever we do, do you know what I mean, to the homeless shelter, whatever, they're now also in the church because they're with me and I'm the church. Right. So I don't need to get you into a building or even into a service. I just need you to be with me.
Be in my space.
Exactly. And let's do some stuff together. And so social justice is the term that we use now, but I think it's kind of important for us to bridge that term with community service, simply because there are generations within our church, there are people within our church that have really been doing this work for years and years and years, but just under a different name. Do you know what I mean? And I know that social justice has wider implications for real societal change, but certainly the on the ground stuff that I think we're talking about, serving the direct needs of our community. There are people that have been doing this graft and stuff. And so really, for me, this is our main evangelistic strategy. Let's go and do some really good stuff to make our little area a little bit better. And you that I used to go to school with, will you come with me? He might not say yes, but I'm finding he's more likely to say yes to that, to will you come to this worship service? He's not quite there yet. Do you know what I mean? So that way everybody wins. The community, the people out there win because we're investing in them, and the people who are my friends, they win because they come and they get a warm and fuzzy feeling. They get to know us, build relationships with us, and ultimately, like, the Spirit of God can kind of move, because hopefully He's in me because I'm His temple. That's what Paul told me. He's meant to be with me all the time. So we're just really keen on trying to get people into spaces with us, and then trust that the positive things that we do will have like a residual benefit for everybody, those on the receiving end, but also those who are serving at the same time.
Cool. Yeah.
So we know right now in the community, some of the prevalent problems are domestic violence, for example. Especially now during COVID, it's been widely documented that there's a lot of women and some men whose exposure to domestic violence has gone up significantly because they're locked in the house with their abusers. We know that gun crime, we've spoken about a lot. The increasing level of agnosticism and atheism that has really taken hold of most Western societies is a big thing. Socioeconomic disparity between the gap between the poor and the rich is getting bigger, and those who are poor are feeling like they're getting left behind by some of as the wheels of society turn and move forward. All of these things are things that we understand and know are problems in our community. Why is it that as a people we continue to insist on holding on to this concept of church that is so insular still? So we know that out there are every Sabbath when we come in and start singing "We're Marching to Zion" in our church, there's a woman down the road from our building who's being beaten up by her spouse, and yet we still want to keep coming back week in and week out and just sing our songs and listen to our sermons and do our things and do our AYS and do our meetings. Why is it that for a people who preach that when God comes back, the question He's going to ask us is, did you visit the poor? Did you visit those who are in prison? Did you feed the hungry? Why is it that we preach that, but yet our practice is so insular?
Thomas, I think, it's a pretty big question you've asked, but I think if our practice is insufficient now, it's not because the church started that way. Whether you go to John 1:1 and the Message version speaking about Jesus Christ coming into the world to habit with us rather than being an absentee landlord who just checks in on us every now and again to make sure that we're not tearing the place apart. But it says He came in flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, right? That's the Message translation of it. Or whether you think about the turn of the 20th century in San Francisco, when Adventists were involved in what has been called a beehive model of engaging in community change and reform, and having a voice in orphanages and in being with people who are sick and who are destitute, in finding the unemployed work, in nursing the sick, in giving out literature and having restaurants and having classes for healthy living. Adventists have done this. Or whether we have a question here about the difference between charity and justice, and Adventists did both, because charity is usually a one-time event and is given direct services. Justice is talking about systemic reform, right? We have done that as Adventists, and we've been able to do that, I think, because of the prophetic voice of Ellen White, who pushed this church in directions that we would never have gone without that prophetic voice. And unfortunately, we are now sitting on our laurels. And I think the second part of my response would be this: there's too much of a focus on Sabbath. And there had been a comment earlier on that I was looking at from, let me see if I can find a Shelley Price had said, do we need to have this tension where we either go out on Sabbath or we stay here on Sabbath? Or you're talking about coming together on Sabbath and singing the songs of Zion while people are being brutalized. I think the difficulty is we have to expand being an Adventist from being just the Sabbath day to being the Sabbath way. It has to engulf our entire life. It has to. We can't try to compress all of our activity, whether it's being a disciple of Jesus, in terms of becoming more like Him through reading His word, or whether it's acting like a disciple of Jesus. That cannot be compressed to Sabbath. It's impossible. Who care? If you've ever had a parent who was an elder, you hated it. Why? Because you may be there at church till like 9 p.m. on Saturday. For what? Why am I at church for 14 hours on Sabbath? It's insane. So we have to like move beyond a Sabbath day to a Sabbath way, and to recognize that I think for most of us, it's just difficult. If you're an immigrant, you're working 2 key jobs, right? You're working back to back. But if you're going to make a decision over whether you're going to increase your bottom line for the year and take another job because you want to get another, $5,000 this year, or you're going, see, now I'm in America, £5,000 versus saying, let me keep those 10 hours because I recognize that as an Adventist, it's not just a Sabbath day, but it's a Sabbath way. So I need to tithe not just my money, but my time. Then it's going to look completely different. And let's be honest, who wants to do that? It's a lot of work. So I think some of it is just because we're not stewarding the time God has given to us. And it's much easier to have conversations that are completely ephemeral. And it's just about, things that engage our mind rather than our body. So I think there's a lot of things, and I could say many more because you asked such a good question. But let me let someone else take it up.
Any other comments? Sophie and then Matthew.
I think just picking up on something that Andrew was saying is one of the things is that because there isn't a relationship there, we only really care about people we have relationships with, and the Bible is a book about relationships, about Christ trying to get back into relationship with us. The relationship that he had before the fall, he's trying to get back into a relationship with us and stay in relationship and take that relationship to the highest point that it could possibly be. And if we're not caring about the person down the street, it's because we're not in relationship with them, because I don't think there's anybody on this call. I don't think there's anybody watching. If it was someone who was in their family, their brother, their sister, who was in a domestic violence situation, would feel hands off and is just like, to be honest, I got like Pathfinders this afternoon, I just don't have the time. You would drop everything and do what you can because of that personal relationship. And I think that what Andrew said was so true, because he was just picking up on the point I'm saying about doing things. He was just like, no, the idea is like with the relationship, then you not only do you have the emotional reason to help, you're probably in a better position to, because they're going to open up to you about that. And these things that are going on in their life, because if we're struggling with the same things that people are all around us, which we are, financial issues because of COVID, emotional issues, marriage issues, domestic violence, like everything that's going on, like those are things that we're not going to even be aware of unless we're in relationship with people. Those aren't surface level conversations. You're not sharing that on a casual high and by with somebody that you meet. That's from living in somebody's life. And I think that's where we really need to kind of rethink how willing and how deep and how raw and how messy we're willing to get with people, because that's what it was about. Like Christ, I think a lot of the comments that people are saying is that Christ lived amongst the people. He was in the community, but he was so accessible in terms of getting to know people. Like people, I don't want to say the word sinners. But if I say the words, I guess it's mostly Adventist watching anyway. So if I say sinners, you know what I mean. But they always talked about, the sinners were comfortable to come to God. And that's because there was a certain level of like, they felt there was something in him that wasn't judgmental, something about the relationship. They knew that if I tell him, if I let him see that I just love being with bare man, like, I just feel like he's gonna be okay with that. And he's gonna still want to talk to me. And more than that, I know that he has the answer. And I don't want to say Adventists have all the answers, but we have such a plethora of, we just have so much. We're just entrenched in all the things that we learn. We learn so much. We have so much to give, but we don't want to make that real and relational. We want to keep it as a head knowledge to prove that we're better than other people. So, but that's my opinion.
So very quickly, Matthew, and then Andrew, and then we'll proceed.
Sure. Just responding to your question, then, bro. I think the reason that we operate the way that we do in quite an insular way, I think really it comes from fear. I think we justifiably started in a position where we didn't want to be of the world. And the easiest way really to not be of the world is to just shut yourself, mothball yourself. Do you know what I mean? So you're not exposed to anything else that might run the risk of kind of turning you, tempting you, drawing you away. That's the easiest way to do it. In I think philosophically speaking, in our minds. And so if we just do our own little thing over here, then there's no risk that I'm going to drift away, that I'm going to leave the church, leave the fold. And so I think that fear kind of inspired a lot of the choices that we make, and it kind of led us towards becoming a bit more insular. And so I just think that we have to not be afraid that if I rub shoulders with somebody who isn't like me, yeah, of course there's a risk that some of them might rub off on me. That's inevitably a risk. But if I don't, then I'm definitely not going to rub off on them. There's absolutely zero chance of me rubbing off on the person that I'm not around. And so I feel that there's just no time to be scared of that anymore. I genuinely feel that it's not that season now. We can't be too scared that people might. If you know what you're about, then let's do it. And at the end of the day, if I know what my weak spots are, then let me not expose myself to certain things and go and move with people in certain ways that are going to expose me. I know myself well enough to do that, but can't have if everything is a weak spot, then I've got an issue here. Do you know what I mean? I'm not a mature Christian. A mature Christian has got to be able to come out of the church circle, out of the Sabbath environment, and be able to function in the world. Do you know what I mean? If you're not, then we as a church have done you wrong. We've done you a disservice in not preparing you to be able to function in a world where you can kind of rub shoulders with people, and at the very least, even if you don't rub off on them, like they don't make you leave the church the next day. You know, real problem. So I think that we need to, now isn't the time to be scared. Now is the time to be willing to say, no, come on, guys, let's not be worried about being of the world. Let's go and be in the world and trust that the Spirit of God is going to help us. He's going to strengthen us. He's going to give us determination and fortitude, and it's going to enable us to build real relationships. That's my take.
Two beautiful points there from Matthew and Sophie. I love that. Andrew, and then I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, man, very quickly, man. All I would say is that in regards to justice, charity, we got to be very, 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 very careful, you know, car. Many a time we say things like this, the church don't really care about dealing with the politicians, and we don't want to really write letters and cause real change, and all we care about is just a little mamby-pamby, homeless feeding, and that's kind of dangerous, man, because like, before we get to the MPs, right, you have to be with the people in their problems to see the need to take it further. Like, you can't just say the church needs to just start getting to the root. It don't work like that. It doesn't work like that, because people that get to the root care about the issues amongst the people. So unless we're willing to be with the people, like entrenched with the people, we're not going to want to go outside Parliament and say, we ain't moving until we get change. Like, it's not just, the church ain't really involved in politics. No, I believe it is easier, in my opinion, to write letters, you know, to meet with politicians. Like, just ask me, because I'm doing the ones on the, I'm on the roads. I would rather sit down with Boris Johnson and just hash out some plans. Rather go to Tom, I'm going to certain areas that I'm putting my life at risk, bro. Like, I'm willing to be around people who could get drunk and harm me, bro. Like, I am giving out certain bank wages that I haven't got for my own family, and I'm giving that to certain friends. So in my opinion, that's the real work. That's primary. If we can't talk about MPs and real justice movements, bro, we're not even in the community. It doesn't even make sense, because that means, Thomas, what we're saying is that let's be real, last point, right? If I see my little girl in the bath and she's drowning, bro, pulling the plug is the solution, right? That's like where the real change is. But the only reason I went to pull the plug is because I am in the know-how. She is drowning. I can feel it. I am now acquainted with maybe the small issue, Maybe it's a small issue, but at least my real change, like me going to government, writing the letters, that has to be driven by being with the people. So I believe as Adventists, we got to start by being with the people. Let's get angry. Some of us ain't angry enough, bro. We're not angry, but we want to go meet with Boris and that. That don't make sense to me, bro.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean,
listen, Thomas, let me be a contrarian here, and let me push back on Andrew. Andrew, let me take your bath analogy and change it to a river. If you're going to swim one day at a river and you see a drowning person and you jump in and you save that person, and then as you're dragging them out, you hear someone screaming, coming downstream because they're also drowning. And you're like, oh my goodness. So you jump back in, you pull them out. And then the third person comes. After the fifth person has come down that river and you've pulled them out, you're going to think, you know what? I need to find out who's upstream throwing these people into the river.
Yes.
Right? So then you're going to go upstream and you're going to try to figure out the cause of the problem, because you can't just keep pulling people out of the river who are dying. And so, of course,
the key is, Dre,
say that again.
The key is, though, Dre, I want to pull them out, though.
Yes.
Before I want to go to the top, I want it to pull them out.
Yes.
I'm saying the church can't miss that point like that. We want to get to the top without even trying to pull them out.
I think what you're saying is the fatigue of having pulled out 5 people will drive you to want to go to the top of the river. I think the guy who hasn't jumped in 2-3 times has no real motivation to walk up the river. Yeah. So I think that's
where, like,
Sophie, yeah.
I think that's where, like, I see something in what Andreas is saying and Andrew, is that that's the idea of a movement, and we talked about leadership, but it's not one person trying to take people out the river. There's one taking it out the river, there's one who's going at the top, there's one here. We should be working, and I think that's the thing that we're talking about when we talk about leadership, because I agree, it's very easy to get on our leadership and say they're not doing or whatever, but even if leadership's involved, and I'm not even talking about the Adventist church, let's say in general. For me, the leadership is not to say that the leadership are going to be out there on the lines picketing, but they give us support, they give us empowerment, they might give some funding every now and then, and they're like, there's something that I can't do at a local level, can you take it, because you have more influence and more power at the level you have, and we work across the board. And that's what I would like to see from leadership, not to be the ones driving the on the ground change, but to empower us to say that we are behind you. Like, so bring your plans, bring your initiatives, and we set up something where there's people on various levels, because that's what I'm talking about, working where you're called. Not everyone is going to be someone who's going to work deep in the trenches in the areas. For me, I'm like, I'll organize an event, I'll plan this, I can write a letter, you know what, I studied this and I can help you there, or I'm skilled in this area, and then we come together as a body to be able to make the change. Because like you said, it's tiring if you were the only person doing everything. Every great leader that we know, MLK, Malcolm X, all these people, they never worked by themselves. They had massive teams around them, and they did one component of it. They might have been the face of it or the speaker, but there were people all behind them, propping them up and making sure that we do this together, because it can only be done together. So from what these two guys are saying, I would think it's together. We need people on every level.
I think that was such a powerful combination of ideas, because I think what Sophie just said is beautiful, because it gives us a very basic visualization or conceptualization of what that organizational initiative should look like. There should be some people dragging people out of the river. There should be some people at the top finding out who this nutter is throwing people into the river, and everybody working concurrently ensures that nobody dies. Matthew, and then we're gonna start to land the plane.
Okay, thank you, bro. What something that I've been thinking for a while, and you guys have just made this abundantly clear, is that just building on this river analogy. If you want to be successful with this, you need to be focused. Okay, our mission is to get people out the river. Do you know what I mean? So you can't have some people. Well, we're the 2 people are on the river team, 2 people are getting people out the tree, 2 people are getting people out the cave. Everyone needs to be this is the main thing we're going to do, getting people out of prison. So some guys are in the river, some guys are upstream, some guys are like got binoculars. I really feel, I've been thinking a lot recently about, if you take charities like Shelter or Save the Children or whoever you want to think of, the reason that Save the Children are successful is because Save the Children say, the only thing that we're going to try and do is save the children. We're not trying to do 10 different things because we can't. And I really feel that a struggle that many of our churches have, and this isn't our church's fault, this is just kind of the model that we've inherited and that we are running with, is that we're trying to do 10 different missions. So you can have a church with 100 people, but we've got a mission to do loads of stuff for children, and a mission to do community service, and a mission to do loads of family stuff, and a mission to do, there's all these different missions, and there just isn't enough resource or energy to really do any of them fully. And so I really think there's value in us going forward. And it's really hard to retrofit this kind of thinking. Maybe this comes about with newer models and newer churches and stuff, but it's really becoming abundantly clear to me that let's just pick one thing and do it well. Because then we can use 100 people to do this one thing rather than go for 10 things with 10 different people trying to do 10 different things. And I understand we have different strengths and different gifts. I totally get that. But I really think there is value in us trying to decide. And that comes back to, I think, one of the first things we said about social justice. It only works if you're all in. It doesn't work if it's just 8% of your church doing it. 8% of your conference, of your organization. So I really think there's real value in us deciding this is the one thing that we want to do, and let's put all of our energy into doing it and into doing it well. Otherwise, you can't really make the kind of real world change that you want to make. Focus. You need to be focused.
And I think we do have a biblical mandate for what that one thing should be. And it seems to me that the idea of going to take the compassion and love of Jesus to those who need it is our central thesis. Because I remember asking myself the question as I was reflecting on what has been the response of church to some of the things that have been going on, whether it be the coronavirus or wherever else. And this issue, Matthew, seemed to be the case. We're jack of all trades, but we're not really trying to master one thing. And I asked myself, if alleviating the pain of the poor is not our central business, then what is our central business? And I think if we don't really hone in on what our central business is, then we begin to have this issue of, a million people pulling in a million different directions, and we're not going in any particular place. And I think something that Warren said on our call on Monday, which is that we have orientated ourselves as a people of, look what I know, look what I can tell you, look what I can teach you. And we're very information transmission focused, and we're not relationally focused. And when we look at this text that we often read, from time to time in Romans 13, talking about let no one owe any debt to any other person apart from loving one another. For those who love have fulfilled the law. For people who are really, I don't want to use the word obsessed, who are really focused on the law and keeping the law and this kind of performative aspect, it seems interesting to me that we have missed the fact that to fulfill the whole law is just to love with the compassion and love of Jesus. And I've spent a bit of time sort of trying to reflect on why that is. And I suppose there's a number of reasons, but could it be the fact that we began life in 1844 wrong? We were wrong. We began on a we call it the great disappointment, and we then put a lot of energy into, hold on, we've just told everybody Jesus is coming back. We've got egg on our face. We now need to quickly go and explain. Sorry, we know where we went wrong. Look, let's show you what we now know. Let's show you what we studied in order to alleviate the fact that we were wrong. And we've now just kind of entered this sort of PTSD vibe of the trauma being we were wrong. And now we have to constantly prove that we are right, prove that we know, prove that we have the information by showing people information, as opposed to being more relationally focused. Does this have anything to do with the footing that we now find ourselves on, where there is more emphasis on transmission of information and being right, as opposed to forming relationships with people?
Tom, in some respects, I think that's a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the older generation, or maybe those who position themselves as more maybe conservative Adventists, may feel that way. I don't think that my generation, and I'm 24, so my generation and those younger, I think, are more focused on building those relationships as opposed to transmitting information. I think, like Matthew was saying, if we're afraid to rub shoulders with people, there's no way that that information is going to penetrate anything. Like, if I'm not in your space, if I'm not sharing those kind of real life conversations, if I'm not living life with you, then you're not going to be as receptive to the information that I'm spewing. And as a generation who I think value their time a lot more, we don't want to be playing those games where we're going nowhere, where there is no clear objective or there's no real outcome. And I think that's where we have to start to reimagine and pivot how we do things. So like it was mentioned earlier about evangelism and community service. Oftentimes in our church, we separate those two. And in reality, they have to come together. And if we're not doing life together and in relationship with one another, then we're going to fail at both of them. Because there's no point me trying to meet your need, but not being genuine about who I am and the reasons behind why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's something I was called and commissioned to do. I'm doing, like Pastor Wesley Knight said, what did Jesus do? Not what would Jesus do? Like, we need to stop trying to, oh, I wonder what Jesus would do, and say, actually, no, he chose to feed the need. He chose to be in the places that were uncomfortable. He chose to live a life that truly reflected his mission and his purpose. And if we're failing to understand what our mission and purpose are, then we're failing to live the life that we are called to live and do what Jesus did.
And that's a powerful point, Sophie. And then we begin to land. I'm looking at the time. Sophie.
I'll try and be quick. I think in terms of the 1844 point, and talks about kind of like this kind of defensive mode, is that we have, as a church, and I'm so glad that it's not for the younger generation, but I know from growing up in church and my experience, we've found our identity in being the right church, in terms of having the information and it proving that we are right, we're the right church, rather than, I think a lot of times, because this isn't for everybody, having our identity in Christ, because I think those are two different things. And I think when we identify with the information, because the information makes us feel justified in who we are as Adventists, what we stand for, what we know, we're on the right side of things, and the information has a place. But I think information by itself, like, if someone's in the river, they don't care about the book that's going to teach them about how to get someone out. And if you let me just, they don't care about that. They need something right now. And that's where I'm talking about identity in Christ. And so beautifully what you said, Abby, and what did Christ do? Like, when he saw someone drowning, what did he do? And I think we really need to get back to finding our identity in the person that is really the source of all the information.
Luke chapter 11:42, I think, is a good verse for us to begin to descend on. Jesus is angry with the Pharisees again, and this time he's saying that you have been faithful in performing all of the religious ordinances. Luke 11:42, you've been faithful in performing all of the religious ordinances, but you have neglected justice and love of God. And the end is what I find most instructive. I think he says, you ought not to have neglected those whilst at the same time still practicing the other things. So he's not saying we should become imbalanced and start becoming only jumping in the river to take people out. He's saying you should have done both of them, but with an emphasis on justice and love for God. And I think any imbalance between one way or the other begins to take us into a slightly wrong footing. And I want to finish on this idea. How did you guys, and I guess I'm speaking mostly to Andreas and Matthew, how have you architected your churches to, and Andreas, I'm more relating this to your work in Seattle in the community church before you went to Walla Walla. How did you build a culture from the foundation that was community oriented and not information transmission? Look what I know. Because we've all heard the saying, no one cares what you know until they know that you care. How did you show your community that you care so that they were more receptive about what you know?
So without lionizing what happened, I think it's important to know the church I went to was one that was small and that was dying. This wasn't an established large church with deep ingrained culture that, was unwilling to change. So it was small, it was dying. They were willing to change, and they gave permission for us to change. We went through a visioning process, and we decided very simply on a mission statement, why are we here? And we said, we're here to love God, to serve others, and to serve our community. So we agreed this is what we're here for. And I think it's difficult to be in a church if you have no vision or mission of why you're turning up, because everyone then holds it internally and expresses it externally, and there's confusion. So we had a mission statement. It was a small group of people. It was dying. They wanted change. And once we did that, we were able to make decisions out of that mission statement. Some of it was similar to what Matthew's doing at his church. We would have once a month a Sabbath where people would go out and serve in the city, and they would serve in various different projects, whether they were going to visit people in prison, whether they were giving food to people who are homeless, whether they were planting trees, whether they were helping build houses for people who are unhoused. We had this as one of our grounding rhythms of the community, because we had said in our mission statement, this is what we want to do. And because people recognize we were in a desperate place. And so we were able to put that into practice. We were able to also partner with schools around us, because we looked at the information and we saw that there were schools who had really high incidences of children who were on free school meals, who were in single family homes, who in fact didn't even have a place to sleep. So we partnered with the school to help them as much as we were able. We were going to do a food pantry, but then we called the city and said, do you need a food pantry? They said no. So we just went to help other people, because we're not trying to be heroes. We're trying to be good neighbors. And so we would find out if it's a need, not just decide if it's something that needed to be done. So I'll give you those just as some of the things we did. But I think it is important, because sometimes you hear these stories and you may beat yourself up and try to implement it in your own church. But it was small, the people were willing, and they were dying. If I had come in and the vanguard who had stayed when the ship would sink and said, no, we don't want to change, then guess what? There'll be no story. They needed to know that it was a desperate situation and were willing to change. I cannot overemphasize that enough. If they did not want to, it would not have happened. And because they wanted to, the opportunities were overwhelming for us. And I think what you're talking about, Thomas, this idea of, what does it look like to be in church, and what does it look like to be so information bound? I think it's a lack of formation when you think about what it is to be an Adventist. For me, if I reflect on my childhood growing up, we did well in some parts of formation and we were deficient in others. And I think a holistic formation is a kind of formation in where we think about being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and then doing what Jesus did. And often we get stuck in one of those places where we think about Jesus and we talk about Jesus, but we don't then move to becoming like Jesus and then doing what Jesus did.
Got that. Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, bro. I think loving what Andreas shared there, first of all. I think that I'm quite privileged now being part of a church plant, because you get to kind of create the culture from the ground up. And culture is a very, very hard thing to change. So if you're starting something new, you get to try and work with people that are like-minded and try and nurture that culture and fiercely protect it and defend it, to be honest with you. For those of us who are functioning, I guess, in an established church, it's hard to change culture if that isn't the culture that's there. So I think that the best advice, and from my experience, try and take small steps, because you'll get there eventually, but if you try and be too radical too quickly, unless, like I liked what Andreas was saying, his church kind of realized it was a change or die set of circumstances. But if a church isn't there or doesn't realize it's there, then it will break the church. So and that doesn't really help anybody. So take small steps. And I think one value that you can start to kind of inculcate within your church, be it as a lay member, a leader within the church, is this principle of when it comes to doing good for other people and serving those around us, people aren't stupid. People can tell if you're trying to do a good thing because you want to convert them. And obviously we want everybody to be converted, but people smell a rat. And even if we have their best intentions at heart, that's going to put them off. They'll kind of see through that. And so really, I think a little bit of an attitudinal shift that we can kind of embrace is we're going to do good things because good things need to be done. And if, as a result of those good things, people want to come to know God, they want to come to know us as a church, then that's fantastic. But even if they don't, this good work still needs to be done because this is a hurting world. And so we're just committed to doing the good things without the regular agenda. We're just going to be change makers. And I think when there's no agenda that people can see, ironically, that's what makes them more open to say, wow, you're not trying to force anything on me. You're just trying to do good. That makes people a lot more open to kind of wanting to connect with us. So I really feel like my closing statement, I guess, is that you can't be focused on trying to save the world at the second coming if you're not focused on trying to save the world now. Jesus, that doesn't wash with God. You know what I mean? When he comes, you've got to be like, yeah, this is what we were waiting for. Then why weren't you doing anything before? God sees through that.
Yeah.
And the person who's all the way looking in the future at the second coming and isn't looking at what's happening around them, that's never been what this game has been about. It's always been about what can I do now, and let's keep doing it. And then, oh, Jesus is here. That's the kind of template that I think has been laid out for us.
That's powerful. Sophie, closing. That's a powerful point. Sophie, closing statement, and then Andrew, a closing statement, and I think we've done some good work.
I don't really think I have anything to kind of add, to be honest. I think you've got people here who are doing the work and have just given really great starting points for people. I guess the only thing I would add is that it's just a journey. Just remember, you have to be in it for the long haul, because everything takes time. I know with Matthew, when he was starting his church, they spent a lot of time just gelling as a core team. Do you know what I mean? Before they even took it to the next phase. So just understanding that it's going to take time, just stay committed to it.
Andrew.
What I would say is that it's really been a good conversation. And I mean that. This is refreshing. Let's not make it seem like these things happen all the time. This is new. In all my life, we haven't had these conversations, especially in camp meeting, right? So, this is a good thing you guys are doing. But what I would say, Tom, is that it's an encouragement, admonition, to everyone online. If we want to fight for the world out there, for the people out there, and we're in a, church body, institution, system, whatever you want to call it, we got to remember on our very doorstep, there are young people in our church who feel like they're not loved. There are women in our church who feel like they're not treated the same way. There are people in our churches who are going through the exact same thing that the world are going through. And this is why I'm so on your doorstep. Like, don't try and save those 10 miles away when the Lord is giving you a test right there. He's like, yo, you got work to do right here. So that's why I think this whole issue going on in the world, Thomas, is so serious, because God is like, let me see if the church jumped to the world's rescue. Like, knowing in our own very church there are similar issues that we can cry about right now. So I would just say, I think Matthew said it, there is no time to see it as maybe it won't wash, or maybe it's not going to go down well. Times are crazy right now, guys, and as long as love is in your heart and you're humble and you mean it in the best way possible, just go out there and fight for the people. Just fight for the people, man.
That's powerful. I'm reminded, and as we finish, and Abigail's going to give us some actionables of John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave us his only begotten son. Another way to think of that makes it more useful for me, at least, is for God so loved the world that he gave us his presence. And I don't think we are able to say that we love anybody if we're not prepared to be present with them through what it is that they're struggling with. And that does not only mean communities externally. I think that also means internally, because there are people hurting inside of church. And this is the cry of a lot of young people, is that they don't feel that people are striving for a relationship with them. They instead want to just get them to perform in the right way. And I think even internally, we have to be mindful that we are able to be present in the lives of those who are suffering and walk with them, and not just shout some instruction manuals. And I'm so grateful for the analogy that between Andreas and Andrew, you were able to bring together, and the benediction was brought by Sophie very nicely. On top of that was this idea that we cannot be on the banks preaching to those who are drowning about how they can get out of the water. It just doesn't matter how good your tract is. It doesn't matter how good your afternoon program was or your sermon was. Your sermon cannot pull them out of the water. You have to be willing to get in there, get wet, get dirty, get messy, and potentially take in some water yourself in order to pull them out. That's what actually is love in action. And as a youth ministry, what we are going to be doing is we're going to create a document which summarizes all of the conversations we're having and the actionable items that we've been talking about, so that if you're interested as a youth leader, if you're interested even as a pastor, to have some kind of working document as a beginnings of what it means for you to have a presence or to give your presence to your community, then it's at least a starting point. Many others have already done it, and we're not trying to teach anybody how to do something that they're already doing. But for those who may be asking, how should we do this? What should we do then in light of this conversation? We'll have that resource prepared for you shortly. Abigail, over to you.
Tom, you really took the word out of my mouth, presence. We really have to practice and participate in being present within not only our churches, our four walls, and the people that are on the membership role, but also those who live next to our churches and the schools that are in our areas that our churches are in. Like, we have to rub shoulders with people. We have to get in the water, in the dirt, in the muck. Even if it doesn't look comfortable, we need to become acquainted with uncomfortable situations to truly live out the calling that has been placed on us, which is to love mercy, do justly, and walk humbly with our God. And if we fail to do those things, we're really failing to fulfill the purpose that God put us on this earth to do and to fulfill. So I just want to encourage and thank everyone for participating in the comments, our panel, and for just being honest and vulnerable. I think these are some of the conversations that we fail to have because we don't like the uncomfortable nature that it may put people in. But it's so necessary, because we're not going to progress. We're not going to innovate. We're not really going to reimagine and pivot and transform if we fail to share the truths of our experiences. So get to know the needs within the people that you rub shoulders with to really begin change and transformation and to live as God has called us to.
Thank you very much, the mother of the youth department. Thank you. Thank you for closing us off so beautifully. Sophie, thank you. Andreas, thank you so much. Andrew, thank you so much. Matthew, thank you. And Abs, thank you. It's late, and I know you guys would rather be in bed or catching up on some kind of Netflix situation, but thank you for having sacrificed an episode on Netflix or wherever you consume your episodes to come and talk with us. And those who contributed in the comments, thank you so much for your contributions, for your time, for your support in watching. Catherine's comment has caught my eye. If you want to find out ways to get involved with your community, she's got a resource here. Urban ministries are doing some great work out in the community with COVID interventions, and there's opportunities there for you to get involved. But thank you so much, everyone who watched online. Please follow us on all of our platforms, on STC Youth Ministries, both on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram. Your support is much valued, and we'll see you on Friday as we tackle the question, is Christianity a European religion? How do we express our faith? That will be a powerful conversation that's going to inform a lot of things. So please tune in, and thank you all of you, and have a good night.